Everybody, I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of the Bulwark, and I am here with my in real life friend, Maya MacGuineas, who is the executive director, president, head honcho over at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And I texted her today because when Elon promised he was going to cut $2 trillion from the budget, I don't know like tons about the budget, but I knew enough to be like, I don't know, discretionary spending is like 1.7 million. So how's he going to cut, or 1.7 trillion? How's he going to cut 2 trillion? But whatever. I was just like, this is like a silly thing. But then today he came out and said, JK probably can't do that. And so I want to show you first two clips. The first clip is the promise. Second clip, him walking it back. I'm going to let Jared roll it. And then I'm going to have Maya, who knows all the stuff about this, explain what's going on.
But we set up Doge.
Yes.
How much do you think we can rip out of this wasted $6.5 trillion Harris-Biden budget?
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Yes.
$2 trillion.
Cool, $2 trillion. Maya, when you heard Elon make this promise, what was your first thought as somebody who is, an expert in the budget?
Actually, my first thought was $2 trillion over 10 years, which is in budget world, how we always think about things over 10 years. That's not really that much. And then it slowly dawned on me that he was actually talking about in 1 year, and that unfortunately was kind of a signal that he wasn't quite familiar with the federal budget at the time. Like, it was the biggest overpromise. It was the biggest, I guess that's how you do a hype cycle, but it really was sort of nobody who has gone through the budget and knows what is in it and what they're willing to do is going to be able to cut $2 trillion out in a year. I did think it was a pretty good goal for 10 years or even the presidential cycle. But
interesting. Okay, well, it seems to have occurred to him that perhaps it was an overpromise for a year. So let's listen to what he said to Mark Penn, notably No Labels pollster, and his podcast. I think it was yesterday.
Have you identified some cuts that you're really looking at that you think will be successful? Do you think the $2 trillion is a realistic number now that you're looking more closely at it?
Yeah. Well. I think we'll try for $2 trillion. I think that's like the best case outcome. But I do think that you kind of have to have some overage. I think if we try for $2 trillion, we've got a good shot at getting one.
But you made a great point earlier, one that was like, okay, over a 10-year span, cutting out $2 trillion. And I think I should say probably up at the top, you and me, you with details and numbers and deep expertise, me with like old Republican instincts. Both of us like the idea of doing something about the debt. We think it's a national security issue. We think it's a huge problem for America to be carrying so much debt. Maybe set the stage actually for you about how, because I think both of us, just the instinct of we should be cutting money from the federal budget is a good one, right?
Yeah, right. I start completely on board with this. And that's right. You and I have a shared love for fiscal responsibility. And one of the things about fiscal responsibility is it's hard. It actually means there's budgetary trade-offs. It starts with doing a budget, which we rarely do in this country. This year, we'll do one purely for the purpose of having reconciliation, which is to pass tax cuts. But it is hard to deal with those trade-offs, and very few people want to do that. And we saw this in the campaign, for instance, where you had both candidates promising many more giveaways, tax cuts or spending increases, than they had in the offsets, because nobody likes talking about what we at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget talk about, but raising taxes or cutting spending. So yes, to have this deck leader who probably has a lot of good insights on actually how to disrupt the budget, take his attention and focus it on spending cuts, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And so I think your question about $2 trillion is really one of the right questions, because it is a failed area of government, which is ripe for disruption. And so I take really seriously the opportunity here. But when the first thing is we're going to cut $2 trillion and there's cheers and cheers, and you think, oh, that shows that you actually aren't familiar with what we'll be able to cut or not cut. And then the next round of things showing all the ridiculous things the government does, like gerbil racing and mealworm mating and all those laugh lines. But they do not cost billions of dollars. They do not cost the trillions of dollars we need. They barely cost millions. Like, they're tiny, tiny items, and they're great laugh lines, but they're not how you deal with the budget. So watching him become more serious and talk about 1 trillion cuts in a year, which really aggressive, but it is not an impossible goal. So let me just put this into context, which is Republicans in the past have talked about balancing the budget over 10 years. That is not going to happen. It will require about $17 trillion in savings. Merely stabilizing the debt where it is right now as a share of GDP, which is about 100%, that's about $9 trillion in savings. Huge. We haven't seen savings like that in decades. The only real savings we've had recently were the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was part of the debt ceiling deal, and that was about $1.5 trillion in savings. But if we could have $9 trillion and stabilize the debt, that would be the biggest fiscal success we have had in decades. So that 1 trillion, ambitious, absolutely, but in the realm of realistic, and it's actually the area I think we should be shooting for. But also, if they even fell short of that, if they saved 500 billion, huge accomplishment. So I'm glad that they're moving in the direction of focusing on what's realistic. I find that encouraging.
So what would he have to get that 1 trillion out? What would he have to do? Because I think part of the problem, as you know, right, we know there's trade-offs, and trade-offs bring pain. And Donald Trump does want to pass a big tax cut. And if you're going to cut taxes, you got to cut spending. But those things, usually it's defense, it's Medicare, Medicaid, it's Social Security. Like, where are they going to get $1 trillion out of the budget?
Here's the news that nobody is going to really like, but it's not going to be just on the spending side. If you want to get $1 trillion in savings, you're going to have to look at both sides of the budget, spending and taxes. And realistically, whenever we get serious about the fiscal challenges that we face, it is going to require both sides of the budget. So there are a couple things that are more likely to make the situation worse than better. First, like you just talked about, the tax cuts. The extension of the tax cuts is going to be in the neighborhood of $4, $5, $6 trillion over 10 years. That is an incredible expense on top of that $9 trillion that we need to stabilize the debt. Secondly, some of the areas of the budget that we might have been able to find savings in the past, defense, national security, cyber, I think those numbers are going up. I don't think they're going down. We've been pushing for defense savings for ages. I think there's so much that we can save in how we do procurement and other areas of defense. There are savings to be had, but I think realistically, they're going to be plowed back into other areas of the budget because the geopolitical risks are massive compared to what we thought they were a while ago or when we had the peace dividend. So there are parts of the budget that are going to be growing. That means these savings get even larger. To generate $1 trillion in savings in a year, there is absolutely no way you can do this without looking at what Donald Trump has said he's not going to touch, but the big items in the budget, Social Security and Medicare. And just on those two, and I can already hear like my phone lighting up with seniors yelling at me, but we have to fix Social Security and Medicare. I know every politician right there has taken a blood oath that they're not touching those programs. If we don't, they are both going to face insolvency. Their trust funds will not have enough money to pay the benefits they've promised. And for Social Security and Medicare Part A, what that means is there will be very significant across the board benefit cuts for retirees and for providers in healthcare. So that's not the right answer, right? The right answer is to think about how to fix these and where to get the savings in a thoughtful way and whether you should put more money into the system as well. But you have to deal with Social Security and Medicare. Beyond that, there's going to be plenty of savings that you can get from lots of different areas like farm subsidies, like veterans. Actually, nobody wants to talk about veterans, but veterans has been one of the fastest growing areas of the budget recently. Domestic discretionary, but not just these blunt caps, rather looking at the things that are outdated and unnecessary. Probably the biggest area is going to be in how we deliver healthcare. That's the kind of thing that doesn't get done in Washington because there are lobbyists for hospitals, for pharmaceuticals, for insurers. Like there is a very powerful constituency group there. But if DOGE is willing to disrupt and go in there and really look about how you increase efficiencies, healthcare is ripe for significant savings, defense savings there as well. Again, I just worry that they'll get plowed back into other areas of the budget. But getting to that trillion, I couldn't do it unless I put at least spending through the tax code, which is tax expenditures. It's all the tax breaks, exemptions, deductions, exclusions, and credits that are in the tax code. We lose well over closer to $2 trillion a year in tax breaks. You could find some real savings there, and that it is spending. It just runs through the tax code.
Okay, so what I just heard you say that DOGE is going to have to do, Okay. They are going to
a
have
recipe
to
for political success.
raise taxes.
I know.
Cut Medicare, Social Security, cut back on what we do for vets, and get rid of tax breaks. Chances that Elon takes that pitch to Donald Trump and Donald Trump says, "Go do it."
Well, Sarah, that's where it's so interesting. So I'm laughing with you. You're saying these things. I'm like, well, that's why it's been so hard to do this job for so long, right? Because what's good fiscal policy is terrible politics. And we know that's true. And for a long time, interest rates were really low and nobody cared. They're like, money's free. Why are you talking about this? As a result of that, we borrowed trillions of dollars more, not just during COVID, but when we were in a strong economy, we borrowed more. And so now when interest rates did go up, the situation is so much worse because of that. So the bad news that is good news for this issue is that when inflation hit, when interest rates went up, it did reawaken a concern about this issue. And you're starting to hear people talking about it with much greater concern than we've seen in years, when you had people writing articles, don't worry, borrow more, print money.
But who's doing that? Like, who are the people who are making sort of the responsible arguments about, like, we're going to have to make trade-offs, guys? Because I heard Donald Trump make a bunch of promises that they don't square with what you just said. He said he wouldn't touch Medicare, Social Security. Like, absolutely not. We're going to take care of our veterans. We know he wants to cut taxes, not raise them. So, like,
yeah.
But he doesn't need to get reelected again. Knock on something.
Yeah.
And so, but Donald Trump's not somebody who one is known to take political pain in order to, do the right thing or do the hard thing, right? He's a populist, and populism sort of demands it. This is the contradiction in so much of it, right? Donald Trump is his base both wants all these cuts, right? Because they think that the government is bad and bloated and all these ways. True in many ways. However, I think they don't, but they also say, like, hands off my Medicare, hands off my Social Security. It's like, what's going to happen? How are we going to do it?
Right. And so let me be clear. The people I'm talking about who are suddenly starting to worry about this issue, and you're hearing it more, they are not the politicians. Behind closed doors, do politicians know this is a problem? Of course they do. But they're not talking about trade-offs. But you're hearing about it from economists. You're hearing about it from the Fed. You're hearing about it from international organizations like the IMF. You're hearing about it, importantly, from business leaders, tech leaders, and people who are in the markets. And since if we do end up having a problem, it's quite likely to start with the markets, where people don't want to buy all of our debt, where the treasury auctions become more challenging. Those voices are ones that actually could persuade politicians. But to your point directly, I see a showdown happening here. I think Elon and I think the folks who are running Doge are quite serious about trying to find savings. I think they're going to look at executive actions as well as the budget. And I think they're going to look at regulatory changes, which are ripe for reforms. But I do see when they go to President Trump, who, when he was in office last time, not only cut taxes, but he raised spending. He raised spending at every opportunity. He didn't cut spending. There was no effort to cut spending. And in fact, every time he raised the debt ceiling, it was coupled with a bill that also increased the debt. So I think it's fair to say that President Trump has never demonstrated an interest in doing things that are fiscally difficult. These things will be fiscally difficult. And I believe that the Doge folks will be squarely behind them, because they would be better for efficiency, for growth, and for the fiscal situation, which is becoming a tremendous threat. But I think that is where the desire to do the right thing fiscally and the desire to do the convenient thing politically could have quite a showdown. I think that's going to be a really tough moment.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm so glad I grabbed you to talk about this, because you've already sort of informed the way I'm thinking about this. But I guess I wonder, Elon, and this is where I kind of put my political and comms hat on, Elon and Vivek love the way that they've been able to kind of live in Trump's populist slipstream. Mm-hmm. And they've been able to make these promises about how they're going to cut, and people cheer, yeah, we're going to go cut it. But you're right, like, it is going to probably lead to some kind of a showdown. And I wonder if Elon, you seem to think that they're serious about it. And I guess my one, I don't know if it's pushback or what I'm interested in, is like, will Elon take the wrath of the voters? Because somebody will take the wrath of voters. Now, in an ideal world, actually, a non-elected official taking the slings and arrows of people's frustration with that it's going to take to make these things solvent. Like, if Trump outsources it to them, you could see how that could almost work, because Elon doesn't have to get elected to anything. On the other hand, I don't know if Elon would go and be as unpopular as making changes like this would demand. But you seem to sort of think differently, which is interesting.
No, I have a mixed read on this. I really have no idea, and obviously care so much and hope that they will be successful. But what I see is his stepping back from 2 trillion to 1 trillion. I found that immensely encouraging. I think that's a great sign of actually being honest, where they didn't have to. They'd already been called out many times, like, you can't do that. And he said that. I thought that was very useful. Another sign of seriousness that we haven't seen one bit of, though, would also be saying, we're going to look at the things like Social Security and Medicare, or revenues or tax expenditures, where the real savings are. We haven't seen that, and I think we're not going to see that. So those are, one sign of seriousness, one sign of it's really hard to save even 1 trillion if you're taking all of these parts of the budget off of the table. I obviously can't get into his mind. I have no idea. But one thing we know about this city is that proximity to power is a lot of fun for people. They like it. And I mean, he's got his own orbit of power, but being part of DC, not a lot of people go up against the president, who has become their tight best friend. And this would be an area where I don't think, from what I've seen of President Trump last time, he would be willing to embrace the things that it would take to save $1 trillion. I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that there are many members who say we have to do it, because last time when they cut taxes, debt to GDP was 75% of GDP. It was really bad, but not terrifying. Now it's at 100% of GDP. That's getting into 2 years from now, we'll be at the highest we've ever been in this entire country, including right after World War II, which is when the last record was. It's getting a little terrifying, and it's getting more so when you look at us versus China and other competitors and what that means for us.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out quick as a last question, because, I started with saying this is a national security risk. And one of the reasons is okay, so to service that debt, just the interest on the debt, right? Which is right. Why people are taking a look on this. Who owns all our debt?
So, and first off, that debt, the service that debt, $1 trillion. We spend more on interest in every year now than we do on defense. That is a sign. I don't think there's any country that's ever been in that position that has come back from that. So much of that debt is owned domestically. Much of it is held by central banks, but a good portion is held overseas. And China owns about $700 or $800 billion of our treasuries. Many people think they would never dump them. Why would they dump them? It would hurt them more than it would hurt us. I don't have quite as much confidence that they wouldn't. I think depending on how tensions grow, that is just another tool in the toolbox. If you are, like, when we had a trade war and all the discussions were about soybeans, I just kept thinking, this isn't just soybeans that can get pulled out, right? These things can go big, and you can dump treasuries and really tank the U.S. economy. So I just don't like having a competitor have that strength over us and us having that vulnerability. There is no question that the level of debt that we have now weakens our economy, weakens our ability to respond to future emergencies, weakens our ability to change our budget. Like, the entire economy is changing because of technology and innovation. We should be changing our budget to adapt to that. We've done nothing. We have done nothing because the budget is so ossified and overburdened that we don't have the space to. And it definitely makes us more vulnerable from a national security perspective. So I think there are lots of reasons to worry about this. The problem is, in this polarized moment, which is something you and I have talked about for many years, when you have two parties fighting against each other, neither of them is willing to do the hard work of governing, because they just need to win the next election, and they tell themselves then they'll do the hard work. We haven't seen it in a long time. I'm hoping it will happen this time, but the record under Trump last time, and the fact that he didn't run on generating savings through any hard choices, it's a concern about how we'll actually get these DOGE ideas through Congress and the support of the president.
Maya, I'm so glad I texted you to come talk to me about this rather than just coming on, popping off, and calling Elon names, which is what I was planning on doing. This was so much more productive, so much more thoughtful, so much more fact-based. So thanks for jumping on and doing this. I really appreciate it.
Sarah, thanks for having me.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.